This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others.
Jamie, I've followed QB Payne on the stage before. It's not good. It's not good. It's not good. Yeah, one of the most charismatic, fantastic communicators that I've worked with. There's some really good ones out there, but he's a good one. And I thought, man, who do I bring up next? I don't want to bring a guest on the stage because I've been there before and I wouldn't do that to them. So it's just going to be you and me this week, but we have a really good topic. It is the season of mid-year performance reviews.
Right, and we started asking people, okay, so what do we do to follow QB Payne?
Yeah, and people were like, well, you know what would be important right now? I'd really like to, we'd have some really good friends that give us really good feedback. They said, mid-year reviews are really good, and so the timing is good. Could you
do that.
Can you tell us how you approach the mid-year review? Well, as luck would have it, I don't follow this standard process. I have my own process that I follow with mid-years.
There's a surprise.
Surprise. I'm a little bit of a rebel, which is probably why I podcast. Let's get into how I approach performance reviews in general, and let's break it down. All right, Jamie, have you ever heard the term KISS?
You mean like the rock band?
No, I'm talking about keep it simple, stupid. So
who are you calling stupid?
It's the only time stupid's acceptable, it seems like, these days. Maybe it'll be eliminated soon as an acronym that people can use. But it is a common acronym that you see used, and I think it applies here in terms of performance reviews. So, when I think about performance reviews, I want to be clear that every company has a process that they're going to want you to go through. I don't know your process, and I'm not going to try to sit here and explain to you how you should do this with regard to your process. I'm expecting you at your company, you know this, okay? So you need to take the advice through that lens, right? So if your company says, well, you have to have a TPS report and a cover sheet, then go do that. I'm not suggesting that you don't do that, but my advice and my counsel this week is independent of TPS reports and cover sheets, okay? So in the absence of bureaucracy, this is the Brent process. This is the process I like to use, and I could say as a company that does have some bureaucracy, let me speak a little bit about that. It's not terrible. I like to get up in the morning and have a consistent cup of coffee. I like when I'm traveling and I'm in Asia, I like to go to Starbucks. Not everybody likes Starbucks. I like Starbucks because it's consistent. I can get an Americano and it's consistent. When I go to Malaysia, one of my favorite countries in the world to travel, some of my favorite people in the world to hang out with, but God bless them, they like cream and sugar in their coffee, and I can't stand it. So I have to search out and find a place where I can get black coffee. And it's hard to mess up an Americano. It's a couple shots of espresso and some water. It's hard to mess that up. So I'd like to go to Starbucks because of the consistency. The bureaucracy of your company is trying to accomplish the same thing. They're trying to get everybody marching in a similar direction. Okay, that's my bureaucracy. I'll get off the soapbox. That's why some of that bureaucracy exists. I'm not anti that. I think that can have some value. Having said that, I hate bureaucracy. I hate it.
There it is.
There it is. So that's enough honesty. I gave you the caveat, but I can understand why it exists. Having said that, when I don't have to be bureaucratic, this is the process I like to follow. So this is the
Feels
way,
organic.
It is. This is kind of the organic way that I like to keep things simple. Simple wins to me. I like to have the process easy. And so that's what we're going to cover. I'm going to give you kind of the basic process, how I like to go through a performance review. And we're really talking about, as we talked about in the intro, the way you would go through this as a person that you're going to go have a review with your boss, and how you should be prepared for that. So we're going to talk about the tactical things that you need to have ready, and then we're going to talk about the mental preparation, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that are don't leave the meeting until you've covered these items. So that's kind of how we're going to go through this. Okay, so let's talk about some of the tactical items. So I've got really 4 items that are critical for me when I'm preparing and getting ready. These are the things that you need to have ready going into a review. I'm going into a review with my boss. These are the items that you got to have prepared. Okay, so I'm going to talk about your top 3 to 5 strengths. Why 3 to 5? Okay. Could you have 10, 15, 20? So I had a boss one time that would have me fill out an Excel sheet with something like 90 items. 90 different attributes, and oh, good grief. I'm not good at 90 things. I'm barely good at 4.
Yeah.
Right? Now, those 4 things I'm good at, I'm really good at those. But the other, 90 something, it's not good.
It gets overwhelming. You don't want to do it at all.
It is. And then when I come out of a meeting going, you know what? There's 86 things that I really suck at, and there's, 4 things I'm good at. How do I feel leaving that meeting? I feel like a loser.
Yeah.
I feel demotivated. I feel disengaged. I feel like a loser. So that's a part of the reason why this is the process. I like to keep it pretty simple. So something in the 3 to 5 range, people will tell you in groups of 3, they'll remember. So I try to stick to 3, but I realize in some cases you may need to, so I'm giving you a little bit of grace here,
right.
A little bit of flexibility to go beyond that. But in general, something in the 3 to 5 range. So we're going to talk about your strengths. You need to be tactically ready with what your 3 to 5 strengths are. We're going to get into each of these in just a second. Then you need to have your top 3 to 5 accomplishments, and then your maybe top 3 to 5 growth areas. And I didn't say weaknesses. I said your growth areas. We're going to get into that in a second. And then your top 3 to 5 next steps. Now, these are not the things you're coming and listening to your boss tell you. I'm telling you, these are the things you need to be prepared for before you go into that review. Have this information.
Steps.
Have these things ready and in your pocket going into that. Now, if your boss comes in and goes a totally different direction, that's fine, but it's good for you to be ready with this. Okay?
It's a good exercise either way.
It is, absolutely. Either way, you're growing and you're getting ready and you're preparing yourself, right? Now, maybe assumptions that we'll talk about. I'm assuming you have already aligned on expectations. So one of the reasons this is the great time to do this is we're in the mid-year cycle. So a lot of people have a mid-year conversation, a mid-year review. This is about the season for that, right? I'm assuming you've already aligned on expectations. Now, maybe you just joined a new team and that hasn't happened. We'll have a separate conversation about how to set expectations with your boss. I'm assuming that you've already set some expectations, and so that's kind of the lens of how we're having this discussion today. Okay. So let's talk about your strengths, your top 3 to 5 strengths. First thing I would say as you're evaluating this and you're preparing to go in for that review, are those strengths relevant to the objectives of the organization? So there are things that I'm good at that my boss just doesn't care.
Right.
I make a mean brisket. If you like brisket, you should give it a shot sometime. But you've got it. It's invitation only. but I make a mean brisket. My boss don't care about that. Right. That's not something that's on her top priority list. And so it's really about highlighting those strengths that really are tied in with the objectives of the organization. What makes sense to the team that you're a part of? That's very important. And then the other thing I want to say is you're going through this process and assessing your strengths, be thorough, right? So whether we're talking about your strengths or your weaknesses, you need to be thorough. What do we mean by that?
Well, I mean, sometimes we're really good at finding our strengths and sometimes we're really good at finding our weaknesses. It depends on kind of how you're wired. I'm excellent at finding my weaknesses.
Right.
I can point out my weaknesses like crazy, and I can point out everyone else's strengths. That's just kind of how I'm wired.
Yeah.
But for me to have to come up with good things about myself is much harder for me.
And I've met folks that are good at both. It's rare to find somebody that's good at, or I've met folks that are good at one or the other. It's rare to find somebody that's good at both, right? So you need to be thorough. And the reason we say you need to prepare this in advance, your perspective may be pretty limited, right? So we had a whole separate conversation about pursuing feedback. I encourage you, and we'll link it, but I encourage you to go back and listen to that with Rodney Miranda, who's really good at this. You need to get your perspective alone won't be enough. You need to go listen and hear from some other people in terms of assessing what your skills really look like. What are your top strengths? And we'll talk a little bit about why that matters in a minute when we get to the weaknesses side, or really the growth areas. Why it's significant that you need to focus in those spaces, and it's good to know the areas where you're really strong. But you need to bring these top 3 to 5 areas where you're really strong. Make sure you're positioning them in a way that this is the objectives of the organization, and here's how I tie into it and why my skills are needed here, right?
So give us an example. What would you bring in as your 3 to 5 strengths?
So one area that I'll highlight all the time is I have a skill associated with communication. It's not something that it's just years of developing it. It's funny. When I first came out of college, if you'd asked me if I was going to be a good public speaker, I said, no way. I hated public speaking. The idea that I'd be sitting here listening or sitting here talking and thousands of people out there listening to me, I'd say, you're crazy. I'm never going to do that. But I also knew that it was an area that I had fear, an area where I needed to grow, I needed to get better at, and I wanted to get better. And so I made a deal with myself. I made a deal with myself that I would never turn down the opportunity to present. Has anybody ever asked me to present? I would say yes. It's been challenging at times. There's been times when I presented, I was like, now that's not to say there are cases now where like if I can present, I'll do it. If there are certain cases like I just don't have bandwidth for that, and I'm not going to do it, right? And in which case, so there are certain limitations. I'm talking about if I have the time, I'm never going to let fear be the reason why I wouldn't present.
Right.
By doing that, it forced me to get better. The more I did it, the better I got, and the more comfortable I got, the better I got at connecting with people, and you start to find your voice. You start to find your style. And we'll do a whole episode sometime on communication in general. We could probably do 5 episodes on communication. It's such an important piece. But that's an important skill that I bring to any organization is my ability to communicate and connect with people.
So you have communication. What else?
So I'm going to bring that in. So that's one. So now again, it depends on the organization and its objectives. If I'm in an organization that doesn't communicate, I can't imagine what that would be.
Right.
But if I have a skill set like I make a really mean brisket, I'm not going to bring that.
Right.
That's not part of my top 3 to 5 items. I'm going to bring the items that add value to that organization. Yeah. If you don't know what those are, have a conversation with your boss outside of the review. Have a conversation with other people that know you. Have those difficult conversations. We've talked on the episode in the past about, I think last week we were discussing this with Hubie, where we're talking about sometimes you've got to have the courage to get the flashlight and maybe a baseball bat or something and get down in the basement and find out what kind of skeletons you got in there.
Yeah.
Go figure out where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And that's a courageous task that you have to do, but you need to do that. You need to get to a spot where you're comfortable and you're willing to do that. This is kind of a self-reflective part that you need to go through before you get into that review. Know who you are. Know what value you're bringing to the organization. If you don't know that, this review is going to be, you know what? You're going to let the wind decide where it goes. You're no longer in control of what's taking place. And it's hard. It's almost control is kind of you don't really have a whole lot of control of things in general, but this is an area you can have a little bit of control. You need to be at least prepared and ready going into it. Okay. So let's talk about accomplishments. The next piece that I would say, you need to bring in your top 3 to 5 accomplishments. And again, they need to be relevant to your team's objectives. If the things that you're working on, the accomplishments that you've had, don't tie into your team's objectives, I don't know why you would bring that and talk about it. And I've had this over 20 years of doing this and 15 years of managing people. I don't know how many times I've had people come in with their accomplishments they're really proud of. And man, they don't tie into anything anybody cares about. That's sad, because that tells me that they were spending a bunch of time on something that they shouldn't have been. Now, as a leader and a manager, that's also some of my fault. But here's the thing I want to really get through to people. Your development is not your boss's responsibility. Okay, that's a tough one to think about, but process that with me. Your development is your responsibility. You need to take ownership. What's the old classic line in, there was a movie called Dead Man Walking. It was really great with Susan Sarandon and there was a great line from it that said, you have to take part in your own redemption. You have to take some ownership of what your development plan is. And the faster you will come to grips with the fact that you own your development plan, your boss will have a huge say in it, but you need to own your development plan. The faster you come to grips with that, the more successful you're going to be. You need to embrace that development plan yourself.
So it sounds like both of these, both the strengths and the accomplishments, is you basically selling yourself back to your boss.
You are, and you need to sell yourself to yourself, right? Before you go in there.
True. You have to buy into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't go sell something that people aren't going to buy. And I'll tell you, when you do this and you go through this process, it changes how you set your objectives and your goals and how you're doing things, because you realize, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. I want that conversation to go well. I want it to look and to be structured in this way. And so I'm going to work backwards and set milestones for myself to make sure that those accomplishments are in place before I get into that meeting. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this process. That's the goal of the process and the reason why we have these performance conversations, right? So they need to be relevant to the team's objectives. The more measurable they are, the better. Coming in and saying, well, I just did a good job on that. I don't know, like how now we're stuck in this, subjective land, and I don't know how to assess that, right? You need to be, well, more than likely your boss is going to be like, how? Why? Show me how. How is it? What result did that look like? Don't wait and let them dictate that. You go assess. And go set the expectation to begin with in a way that here's how we're going to measure that. And we're going to get to that at the end in terms of don't leave the meeting without having an agreed upon measurable, this is how we'll tell whether we're successful. Jamie, what's an example of something that would be measurable that versus something that would be more qualitative?
Well, I mean, for me, as an editor, there are a lot of times that I will have to give the feedback on put more dialogue or put more of anything like that into the paper, right? But I need to. Do you use numbers? Put 10% more. Put 3 more lines.
Great example.
And it's not really it's a more.
This is why I always hated English.
And
English class in college and in high school was always like, yeah, you seemed like you didn't have enough dialogue, or your tense was slightly off. That doesn't help me. Tell me specifically what sentence you didn't like.
Right, and not everything is a numbers game. Sometimes there are things that are more or better or.
So how do
like
you
that.
help people when you're giving editing? So you're editing people all the time. When you're giving somebody advice, and nobody likes to have their writing edited, how are you giving them constructive feedback in a way that's measurable that they can go take action on?
I use highlighters. So I will use blue for dialogue, red for statements, yellow for he said, she said type thing. And then you look at the paper and you can see there's not much blue there. You need more blue.
Yeah. And an example maybe in a more tactical, like in an engineering world, would be something like, I've seen people that would say, I want to make sure this project is successful. I don't know what that means.
Right. Define success.
Yeah. Because then you were getting into, well, it was successful because it made money. Yeah, but you were late. It barely made money. You almost missed everything. So break those things down into specific milestones so that you can say, here are the items. Here, I said I was going to have this done by X date. The more measurable you can make it, the better. Right. The other thing we'll say in terms of the accomplishments that I'll say, you need to rank these for yourself before you get into the meeting, right? So you might have there have been cases where I have an accomplishment that I really love. Because I really love working on proactive problems. I like solving problems that people don't see yet, right? But my bosses often don't, right? That's just the nature of sometimes, our bosses at times it seems like the more you move up the chain, sometimes you just get a flooded inbox of things that they're dealing with, especially if they're dealing with angry customers, or it can be very reactive in nature, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That sometimes can be very efficient, right? So, but at the same time, I like to work on things that are more proactive. We've talked about it on the podcast before. If I come in and lead with my favorite thing that's super important to me that I'm passionate about, but it's not something my boss is passionate about, and I know this, don't lead with that. Lead with the thing you know your boss is going to be passionate about, right? And if the work you're working on is not something that your boss is passionate about, and you know this, I don't know why you lead with it. And by the way, you probably should not talk about it. Just go work it separate and go talk to the people that do care about it.
So what do you do if it's a team accomplishment, not a personal accomplishment? Do you list those in your 3 to 5 accomplishments?
I would also highlight the things that you're most directly contributing contributing to and again, I say rank them.
Right.
That doesn't mean you won't highlight the thing that you were loosely involved with, but maybe you can bring it in last. When somebody comes into me and they go, the biggest thing that I accomplished this year was X, and I know they spent about 10% of their time on it, and they weren't the lead on the activity, that's not good for you. I go, interesting. Okay, you spent a bunch of time on something and somebody else did all the work.
Right.
Lead with
and
the
now
things
you're taking
that,
credit.
Yeah, that's right. And then don't lead with don't talk about accomplishments that you didn't do. That's a recipe for disaster. You're just hoping your boss doesn't know and that they can't see through that, right? And more than likely they can, and they know and are aware of what what you've been working on, right? So highlight the things that are that you've directly contributed to. Rank these items. Rank them by what you think your boss's priorities are. If you don't know this, you've already failed. You need to be aligned on this earlier in the year. Now, again, if you've never had an expectation meeting where you were aligning on expectations, peace. I understand that. That needs to be something that you prioritize and discuss.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about the growth areas, as you call it. Okay, dude, aren't these just weaknesses?
So why I call them growth areas, and I do this even in the emails that I send to my teams, I'll refer to them as growth areas. I have this certain philosophy, and this is not mine. I'm stealing this again. I steal this from John Maxwell, but I do relate to this one. I'm not a huge Maxwell fan about everything that he says. Sometimes they're just empty axioms that make me feel like I have motivational hangover, where it's like I'm fired up, but I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
But this one I do latch onto, and I can align with, which is, and again, you don't have to agree with me. This is my philosophy. On a 10 scale, and I've probably talked about this before, but not everybody listened to every episode, so I'm going to go over this. On a 10 scale, on any given attribute of a person, whether it's communication or technical ability, it could be whatever that attribute matters for your organization. On a 10, my ability to make brisket, whatever that is, on a 10 scale, I might be able to work really hard and move 2 to 3 points. So if my brisket making capability is a 7 and I work really hard, I might get to a 9. And people notice this. As Maxwell would say, people stand in line for 9s, right? But if I'm a 2 and I work really hard and I get to a 4, no one cares. This is no one's going to make a difference. I'm not differentiating myself in that way. So the idea behind growth area versus weakness is there are areas that I'm just weak and if I'm a 2 at it and I work real hard to get to 4, I don't care. I'm not going to spend time and energy there. Those aren't going to be growth areas for me.
What if it's something that your boss really cares about?
Okay, then you might need to think about the role you're in, and do you have long-term success potential in that spot, right? So if the thing they value you're a 2 at, you might need to think twice about how you got there or what else you need to go do, because you might be the wrong fit for that gig.
Right.
Might be better to go take a look and go make a transition to something else, right? So you want to focus in areas where you're really strong and work from a position of strength as much as you can, because that's where you're going to differentiate yourself, right? That's the spot where people are going to, again, you want it to be where people are standing in line for this. So
okay, so again, for you, if we were to ask you what would be your 3 to 5 growth areas, what kind of thing would you personally give your boss?
I always want to get better at communication because it's an area of strength for me.
So you
I want to
can
get better
say
at
that's
it.
both a strength and
It
a growth area.
is. Those are the same. They are often very similar. Things now that may not be the best area, because I might have hit a point where I don't know how much better I'm going to get at this, right? But so there may be other examples of things that I'm strong, other areas where I have strength. Like, so for example, team building. I want to get better at this. Or, again, you need to use examples or think about things that are going to have the biggest impact on the organization that you're in. I'm giving you generic leadership cases. Let me talk about more practical, tactical, specific things. I might need to get better at C programming. I need to get better at whatever specific tactical thing that you have, right? In the writing environment, it might be, I am weak. So from an editing perspective and a writing perspective, you may say, you know what? I write most genres well, but I got to get better at suspense. I need to be able to write suspense better. Okay, that's an area you're already pretty strong in writing. You just need to go get better at that particular area and arena.
Right. Or time management would be something that's
It's a good
like,
example.
Yeah.
Maybe
across the board.
maybe I'm already pretty good at this, or I got some strengths here, but I want to go get better at that. Now, there are some weakness areas or some growth areas or some areas you're not good, and it doesn't matter. You just got to get better at them. There's some things that somebody's got to take out the trash. Somebody's got to, wash the dishes.
Right.
There's certain things that have to. Now, I might not need to spend a ton of time to get to be the best in the world at that. They're just things that still have to get done. I'm not suggesting that. So, for example, let's use golf. I should use food analogies because they work across all cultures. But I'm going to use golf because sports analogies are easy for me. It's the first one I think of. Tiger Woods needs to be good at putting, not just driving. He's got to be good off the tee. He's got to be good with the driver, and he's got to be good on the green as well. So how could you be a head chef, for example, and be terrible at pastries? Like, I don't know how you could. It seems like they'd have to be good at a little bit of all of these things. They'd have to get. You need to be good at all these. If I'm going to a restaurant and they specialize in appetizers and that's all they do. Yeah, next. That's not something. That's a good example where you're going to need to grow in some of those areas, right? That doesn't mean that a head chef needs to be good at dominoes. That has nothing to do with what they're doing. I'm using a paradigm example, but just to provoke you a little bit for shock value. But I think hopefully you get the point. So the other thing I want to talk about in terms of your top 3 to 5 growth areas. These are often in your strength areas. Okay, we talked about that, but also you need to break these up into really tactical actions. What are the tactical things that you can do? So you don't want to come in into your review with the growth area I have is I want to get better at X and that's it. No, how? Like what specifically? Okay, let's go back to the food analogy. I'm going to get better at being a pastry chef because I want to be a head chef and I'm really good at everything else and I'm going to get better at this. If we're going back to the golf analogy and you say, I'm going to get better at my short game. Okay, how? What specifically? Well, I'm going to put in X amount of time per week working just around the green, chipping and putting and doing those types of things. You need to break that down into tactical, specific things that you're going to go do. Why does that matter? You may not get measurable results right away.
That's right.
You may not. Right? And that might be okay, but you need to at least be able to go measurably show the effort and the time that you're putting in and to be able to speak to that and break it into sub-milestones.
It's the equivalent to starting a diet or strength training or workout regimen or anything like that. I want to work out 5 times this week. I want to total 6 hours of workout, whatever it's going to be. Yeah. I want to make sure my calorie intake is this, whatever that is for you.
Yeah.
And you can check the list and you can know you're working towards that goal, even though the scale may not show it.
That's right. If I want to get faster on the mountain bike, I may have a goal for myself to say, okay, my fastest time, one of my local trails that I like to hit is Rowlett Creek Preserve. And for folks that live in Colorado and California, hey, this is what we have. We don't have a ton of elevation gain in Dallas, and Rowlett's not the best example, but it's fun, it's flowy, it's quick. I love it. It's one of my favorite trails. But if I'm going to try to get faster at RCP, I'm not going to say, well, I'm just going to get faster. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to put in 3 laps a week. Because if I put in 3 laps a week, I'm going to get faster because I'm competitive. And I know, so only you know what those little sub-actions will be, you and your boss, and align up. These are the tactical thing, measurable ways that I'm going to go break this down in ways that I can go attack this goal.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about strengths, we talked about accomplishments, we talked about growth areas. Let's get into the critical next steps. You need to have in your mind what those critical next steps are, what you believe those critical next steps are coming into that meeting, right? Now, all of these things, you need to be adaptable and flexible as you go into the meeting because you're going to be listening to feedback from your boss. We're going to get to that in a second. The mental preparation is a whole separate game, man. But you need to be prepared with what you believe those critical next steps are, and you need to be adaptable and flexible in all these top 3 to 5 each case. Whether it's your strengths or your top 3 to 5 accomplishments, you need to be ready to be flexible in those areas. But your critical next steps, they need to be measurable with appropriate milestones that make sense, like we've talked about already, for your organization and for what your team is trying to do.
I immediately thought of the movie Elf. And he's sitting there talking to his dad, and he's like, today we're going to go do this, and we're going to make this, and we're going to do this, and he's so excited about the day. And then the dude looks at him and says, I got to go to work.
Well, I'm
and
going
he's
to
like,
work.
oh, well, yeah, of course.
He just shakes the Etch-a-Sketch and erases.
Of course, I didn't mean any of that.
You need to have measurable, specific things. Go ahead and write them down, not on the Etch-a-Sketch. Don't erase them. Your boss might say that. Your boss might have that. Was it James Caan? I think it's. Your boss might have that reaction. Don't just erase the Etch-a-Sketch. Hold on to it and list it. We'll get to that when you get to the mental side. But you're exactly right. You need to be have that stuff in your mind, even though they might be completely irrational. Have those ready for you and in your brain. One of my favorite movies. It's fantastic. The other thing in terms of your critical next steps, I want you to think about, which is, what are the things that you should stop doing, and what are the things that you should start doing? And in each of these cases, all the things I'm talking about, you're going to align with your boss on these things, right? And so alignment on what you should stop and what you should start is super important.
Right, because sometimes I have a list of 20 to-do items, and I need to know, okay, of these 20, what are my top priorities?
Yeah.
And they can't just be mine. They have to be aligned with my boss.
That's right. Super important. We joke on our social media about Venn diagrams. I love using Venn diagrams, and I think
yes, you do.
I do. I use them with the kids all the time. You can go see if you go out on Instagram, you can see the Venn diagram that I did with my kids. I was explaining Venn diagrams to them, and we were talking about. I used music to explain it to him. I said, okay, here's rock music, here's rap music, and here's, I don't know, what was the other one that we used? Something else. And then we had them fill in, because my kids all know music very well because they just get it from me, so I love music. So we were filling in bands that cross over into each case. This Venn diagram that we're talking about here is the alignment of the things that you think are critical and your boss thinks are critical. And that center area, if you don't have alignment of that center, that's the point of the performance review.
Right.
Is to gain alignment of the center of that Venn diagram.
And sometimes you are blown away. Sometimes I'm blown away when I'm like, I had absolutely no idea. I have been spending 90% of my time on something you don't care about.
Yeah, that's frustrating to me, because it's one thing to rent your time out. It's another thing to waste your time.
Yeah.
Right. And so making sure, like, efficiency, maybe that's just an engineering thing, but I want my time to be useful. And if I've been working on something nobody cares about, oh my goodness gracious, I get frustrated, right? So
this is one area that I tend to probably over communicate. If someone asks me to do something else, I'll say, I totally can. Would you rather me do that or this?
And so, one of the items maybe we'll talk a little bit about in terms of the tactical piece before we get into the mental piece. On the tactical side, write this stuff down. Now, you don't have to send it to your boss in advance before the meeting, but I think that's very valuable. There's something about written word that goes with verbal communication. I don't know how many times I've had where I've told somebody the feedback and they sat there and looked at me like, deer in the headlights. And then I send it in writing and they come back to me and go, hey, I disagree. I'm like, that's word for word. I just told you this.
Right.
But there's something about people will hear a certain thing and the brain can shut off. So the listening comprehension.
It becomes the Charlie Brown episode.
Yes, that's right. Especially when it comes to negative feedback.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to that. So these are some of the tactical things that you need to have ready for you. You need to prepare these things before you get into a performance review. Have those things broken down and in your mind. Though your top 3 to 5 strengths, your top 3 to 5 accomplishments, your top 3 to 5 growth areas that you believe growth areas, not your weaknesses, because you may be weak in an area. So let's say, okay, you keep picking on it. Let's talk about it one more time. If you're weak in an area and it's and you're not going to get any better, what do you do about that? You surround yourself with people who are good at that. You need to get people. You need to get really buddy up with people who are good at that, right? And do it in an authentic way. But that's how I would address that. And then your top 3 to 5 critical next steps. Let's talk now about your mental preparation. I think this is probably more important than the tactical stuff,
right?
And it's the harder piece. It is the more challenging piece. The first thing I want to say, this is going to sting. Okay. Performance reviews. And this is the reason why people have anxiety around performance reviews, is because nobody likes to be told where they're not good. Nobody likes to hear that feedback, or not many people do, especially early in your career and you're not used to it. The feedback that you got in college was that you got a B or a B minus, and then you told yourself a story about why you deserved better, and you moved on about your day. Now you're being told to your face, you're weak in this area, and that stings. That's a hard thing to hear.
And depending on your culture and how you were raised and all of that, if you had the everybody gets a trophy upbringing, you're probably not getting a trophy here.
No, you're not going to get a trophy. When we were raising our kids and they were real young, we would see the participation awards and stuff that would come in and just be like, what? What?
Right.
Because in the corporate world, or just in life in general, there's no trophies here, man. It's grow or die. You need to have a certain level of ambition or drive and a hunger and a passion that's there. And participation trophies aren't handed out very frequently in the real world. So I do think that you need to get your mind wrapped around it's going to sting, but it's a good thing.
Right.
You got to get to a spot. Now, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to the Pursuing Feedback episode. You need to get to a spot where you value it. So you got to get to a spot where, and I've talked about this before, when I start to get negative feedback and I wasn't expecting, and it's different when I'm going to a performance review, I expect it.
Right.
I expect it. If I'm not getting constructive feedback, something's wrong.
Right.
Now I'm going, okay, what kind of leader am I working for?
Yep.
What are you scared? Are you just being a coward? I'm being aggressive with that language, but I expect you to have the courage to give me the feedback. If you're a manager out there, come on. You have to have the courage to give the feedback. You owe it to them to give the feedback.
I can't grow if I don't know where I'm lacking.
That's right. You got to share that feedback. Now, we'll have a separate episode talking about, as a manager, how to go give that feedback. You better do your homework on those things. Don't just be like, what I've observed is that you wear this shirt and I don't like it. Whoa, you have no business managing people unless you're working in the fashion industry or something, and green shirts are required or something like that. You definitely need to be relevant, but that's not what we're talking about. You need to be ready coming in, and you need to be mentally prepared that you're going to get that feedback. It's going to sting. This is where people talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is being able to control my emotions. It's knowing that I'm going to get it and I'm not going to react to it.
There is something about being able to be stoic and to be able to hear what they're saying, take note of what they're saying, process it later. Just listen. Be aware and give them the time and effort of actually taking in what they are telling you, because the manager is probably having a very hard time giving you this negative feedback. It's
hard to get feedback. It's hard to get authentic feedback from people. We talked about this with Rodney a few weeks ago. It's hard to get people who will be honest with you. You should treat that feedback like gold.
Right.
And yet at the same time, if we're honest with ourselves,
it is so hard.
It is tough. I remember coming out of college, going to an interview, and if you've never heard of a confrontational interview, go Google this, and you're just going to get angry, and your blood pressure will rise just from reading about it. And I didn't know what it was. I was 19 and know nothing, right? Or 20 or however old I was. And I went to this interview, and I didn't realize at the time, but looking back at it, I was in the middle of a confrontational interview. It was intentional. They were trying to fluster and rattle me to see what my reaction was. Worked great, right? Because they decided they didn't want to hire me, because at the time I didn't know how to deal with that. But I was also 20, so come on. But yeah, I had this confrontational interview with a person basically said, well, from someone from your alma mater, I just expected more and I'm really disappointed. And the things they were asking me weren't covered for a bachelor's degree. I never covered those things. And I look back at it and go, okay, there was no realistic expectation that I would know the things. They're asking me to do proofs of convolution and things that, like, I loosely knew what convolution was. That doesn't have anything to do with whether you're going to hire me or not. But it was a confrontational interview with the objective to rattle me. And if I'd had the emotional intelligence that I do now, not like I'm like some supreme being here, I still have meetings where I have unsolicited negative feedback and I have to stop and I have to slow my heart rate. And I have to be like, wait, this is feedback? All feedback has a figure of merit. It's going to be okay. It's going to be good. You're getting gold. Just relax. But at the time I didn't. And all I could think about was, I want to cry, I want to run, I want to punch you in the face. Those are the kind of fight or flight reaction. You got to get your brain wrapped around mentally. You're about to get some feedback. You need to want it. Don't react. Don't react. Just listen. Just listen. Just try to learn. Just try to get as much information from the person. At the most you might do is ask clarifying questions, not defensive questions, right? I'll give you some examples, right? So I've had cases where somebody asked questions like, oh, that's what you think, huh? That's extremely defensive. That's not what you're talking about. You're like, maybe in a better example would be like, hey, this is helpful. This is helpful. Can you help me unpack this a little bit more? Maybe don't use unpack. That some people look at that and be like, what does that mean? But I've used that before. Hey, help me understand this a little bit better, because this sounds like this is going to help me. I just want to make sure that I understand. Can you clarify what you meant when you said always, or whatever the thing is? Have them clarify. You can ask them clarifying questions to make certain that you fully understand. It's so hard to get feedback. I want this person to give me feedback in the future, so I don't want to react in a defensive way that prevents them from giving me additional feedback.
That's right.
Because when people react defensively to me, especially if it don't work for me, like, I don't have to give you this feedback at all, man. You can just hit the road, go pound sand. The door's right there. Let's go move on with our day. So to get that feedback is so valuable. It's tough. Okay, let's transition. That's the mental preparation. Which a lot of the job is psychological. Get your mind wrapped around. It's going to sting, but it's good for you. It's like going to the doctor. You're going to get a shot, but it's good for you. It's good for you. And if it's not good for you and it's not making you better, get a new doctor, right? That's just how the process works. Let's talk a little bit about don't leave the meeting without covering. Don't leave the meeting without good, solid alignment on what? Specific and tangible actions that you can follow up on. And the reason I feel passionate about this is you'll hear a lot of corporations talk about, and Rodney and I talked a little bit about this in the Pursuing Feedback episode. You'll hear people talk about you need to have a beginning of year, a mid-year, and an end of year. Hogwash. Have it more frequently than that. I'm telling you, I can't tell you what your company's compensation review cycle is, but don't wait until after that cycle to respond to feedback.
Right. And they don't have to be like formal. They don't have to be like big, bring in a notebook and checklist, but just checking in to make sure I am doing what you think I need to be doing and that we're still aligned.
Don't leave the meeting without alignment that we talked about the Venn diagram,
right.
Your priorities and your boss's priorities and your organization's priorities, okay? Not just your boss's priorities, your organization's priorities. If your boss's priorities are XYZ and yours are XYZ, and then you look at your organization's priorities and they're not XYZ, something is broken.
Right.
Have a conversation with your boss about that. How do you fit in the big picture, right? And this is super important. If the things you're working on aren't the most important things to your boss, something's going on. Something's going wrong, and you should ask the question, are these the most important things you're working on? Now, if you're not working on those, that's probably because you haven't proven to be a problem solver that's worthy of working on the top problems for your boss.
And depending upon how long you have worked for that particular boss, sometimes you just have to prove yourself.
It is. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's like, yeah, I'd like you to work on it, but I don't trust you yet.
But if you have worked for the same boss for years and years and years and years, and you are still not on their priority list.
And some people, that's okay. Some people, we've talked about this in the podcast before.
Right.
There's quarterbacks and there's offensive linemen. There's sous chefs, there's pastry chefs, and there's head chefs. If your goal is to be the head chef, you need to be working on the top priorities of the owner of the restaurant. You need to be working on the most critical tasks. Make sure you're having a conversation that says, look the person in the eye. Are these the top 3 most critical things on your to-do list? Ask that question. There's no reason you can't ask that question and get an answer to it. And they better line up with the organization's top 3 things. If they don't, something's broken and you should go revisit, right? Don't leave the meeting without alignment with that. Don't leave the meeting without how you'll measure success. Don't leave it in a subjective way. Your boss is probably telling you you need to make these measurable and tangible. I'm telling you you need to do it. Come in with measurable, tangible. Your boss is going to be like blown away, like, oh, this is good. Okay, let's go this route. It needs to be tangible and measurable. It's good for you. It's good for them. Make it tangible and measurable to eliminate the subjectiveness.
Okay, so when you're looking at, I want to be 90% on time, or I want to be whatever, obviously perfection is what you're ideally looking for. Do you sandbag?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had a really great leader that I won't name because he might fire me, but I had a really great senior leader in my organization ask me one time, what percentage on-time execution makes sense? And I was like, oh, this is a trap question.
Right. That's a trick.
It is a trick. And I was like, good grief. Because if I say 100%, is that really, what does that do? Because I can tell you what I would do. If my goal is 100%, I'm going to sandbag and be like, all right, I'm going to pad schedules about a month. And I'm going to make sure I get that 100%. And so I knew that was the wrong answer. And I was like, I think at about 95 probably makes good sense. And luckily I got the answer right. But ultimately, that's the challenge is you don't want, like, whether you sandbag or not really comes down to the relationship that you have with your boss. If it's a brand new boss I've never worked with, I'm probably going to say, hey, I'm prone to being transparent. As you can probably tell, as I'm doing a podcast, giving away all my secrets, I'm prone to being transparent. So I'm probably going to have a conversation with my boss and say, hey, look, I realize 100% is the vector, but I don't want to pad schedules. And so I want to try to set the bar at 95. I also know that we're sitting at 82. And I want to get us to that 95 mark. So I'm going to hold that. We won't get there this year. I can tell you right now we won't, but I think that's the right vector. Would you prefer us to set the bar to 85 and I would just have an honest conversation with my boss about that. If you don't feel like you can trust your boss, you might need to sandbag some. And it just depends on the relationship you have and what the expectations of the organization are.
Right. And even if you are an entrepreneur, solopreneur, have a small business, the same type of thing happens there. I mean, I remember like pizza delivery companies. They used to say 30 minutes or it's free.
Right.
Now, somebody had to do the math on it takes this long to make the pizza, it takes this long to bake the pizza, it takes this long to get it to the average household within this distance. But I am hoping that they actually put in a little bit of a cushion there, right? Because otherwise they were giving away a lot of free pizzas.
Right.
Same thing happens. You hear plumbers all the time. I'll be there in 24 hours or it's free.
Don't get me started.
I mean, but it happens across the spectrum.
Yeah. You almost want to ask the plumber and the cable guy, how late are you typically?
Right.
The traditional amount, or is it like way beyond that?
Right.
So, your question is fantastic. I think the right answer for me to sit here and tell you, I'm going to give you the right answer and the honest answer. The right answer is no, you should have a transparent, honest answer. Okay. The real answer. Yeah, I'm sandbagging.
Well, yeah. And
if I can get by with it, I'm going to sandbag. But I also am prone to being transparent. So I want to make sure that my boss understands here's reality. Here's what I think we can achieve. And I think that's probably the best thing to go do. But I don't fault people for now. Some people sandbag like crazy, and that's dangerous business.
Right.
Be careful, right?
Right. I know even when I was first starting my career as a freelance writer, and I would propose articles to magazines or blogs, and I would say my turnaround time was 48 hours from acceptance. And I had to do that. I had to really work on that to make sure that my bylines were getting out there, right?
Yeah.
But once you establish your name, then all of a sudden that turnaround is 2 weeks.
Yep. Yeah.
Because you can claim you're more in demand or whatever it is, but you've got to put that cushion in there. Now, I can probably get it done in 48 hours, but I'm not going to let you know that.
Folks, I hope this was helpful. We're talking about performance reviews. It's mid-year time. Go have this conversation with confidence. I want you to go through this process. I want you to take notes on, go through this process, mentally prepare yourself, go through the tactical process. Don't leave the meeting without these items we've covered and talked about. Keep it simple. If you have specific bureaucratic nonsense that your organization requires, don't tell them, hey, according to Brent Richardson's podcast, this bureaucracy makes no... Don't do that, because I'll tell you that's not what I said on the podcast. But go filter it through the lens of what your bureaucracy is and what the things that you need to do, because they do have some value. And go and attack it from this direction. I think you're going to find the review and the conversation to be way better than you've had in the past.
So we have officially dropped the stupid, right? Now it's just keep it simple?
It's still KISS, I guess. Maybe I shouldn't have said stupid to begin with. I'll get feedback on that. Hey, you know what? I welcome the feedback. Bring it on. It's okay. I'll take it. You tell me, I go comment, leave me negative comments. It's okay. Tell me I need a haircut. I don't mind.
Give us a mid-year review.
Give us a mid-year review. Folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as we're having a good time sitting here and doing it. Giving away my intelligence, whatever it is actually a fun thing, and I enjoy it. All right. Performance Reviews 101. The world's problems are solved. So maybe
Is that simple?
That's simple. No problem.
Wow.
Right. Hey, performance reviews create anxiety. I hope this helps remove some of the anxiety. Go try it. I want to hear from you. You tried it. You said, that was awful. It didn't work at all. Tell me about it. I want to hear that. You tried it. You said, it's really great. I want to say how much I appreciate people's responses to last week's episode. It was so positive. It was really, really encouraging. Give us those too. That's really good. If it's helpful for you, come give us a thumbs up. Go give us some feedback on wherever you're listening to the podcast. I think the only place out there that actually takes it is through iTunes or for wherever you're listening on Apple Podcasts. But we'd like to hear the feedback. Go give us a thumbs up out on wherever you're active on social media and give us a comment and let us know it's valuable. Otherwise, we're just sitting out here talking by ourselves.
And if you have specific things that you would like us to cover,
yeah,
please
we're open to
email
hear
us.
that, right? So
that's
there's
where this episode came
no
from.
short. Yeah, this episode came from a specific listener that said, hey, could you cover this topic? So I think it was, and I was like, yeah, the timing is great. It's really impactful. It's helpful. Hopefully it's useful. Folks, have a great week.